Section 6.5, Linear Inequalities. In this section, we're going to just talk about what an inequality is. We'll solve and graph some basic inequalities. An inequality is exactly what it sounds like. An inequality means it's not equal. So a lot of times when you solve these, you're going to get whole sets of solutions, not just a number in particular. There's four common symbols that you're going to encounter. The first one is going to be the less than symbol. Notice when you look at the less than symbol, the arrow or the pointy end points to the left. That's how I tell people to remember it. L for left, L for less. What this means is the left-hand side always has to be smaller than the right-hand side in order to be a true statement. The next is the less than or equal to. Notice the only difference is they threw a line under the less than symbol. So that means the left-hand side needs to be less than the right-hand side, or the two numbers are allowed to be equal to each other. Then you have the exact opposite. You have the greater than sign, and you have the greater than or equal to sign. When you write an inequality, you're going to have two expressions, and you need to think of the expressions as the left and the right, and the inequality symbol is going to go in the middle. So if you look, I've given you three examples here. You first have the inequality that 3 is less than 5. That's obviously a true statement, but notice that there's no variables in there. So that's not going to really be an algebra concept. So once we start throwing variables in there, x is smaller than 2. Then it becomes more like algebra. And then, of course, they can make it look like you have to solve for x, which we will do here in a minute. First thing you want to talk about, or you want to learn how to do, is how to graph. Okay, so let's say that I asked you to graph the solution set for x is smaller than 2. So when you do this, you're always going to graph on a number line. I typically like to show where 0 is on the number line just for reference. Then whatever number is in your inequality, you want to make sure that you plot that on your number line. And then at the number itself, you have to decide whether you want to use an open circle or a closed circle. And that is going to be based on the type of inequality sign that you are using. If your inequality sign does not have a line or an equal to symbol underneath, you will go with an open circle. If your inequality sign has the equal to sign underneath, then you have to use a closed circle or a solid circle, however you like to think of it, but it'll be colored in. Okay, so this one does not have an equal to sign, so we will use an open circle here. And then you have to shade your line. We want x's that are smaller than 2. So numbers that are smaller than 2 would be numbers like 1, 0, -1. And you could go left forever, and so because you could go left forever, you end up putting an arrow on that line. So you have just shown the solution set. Any number that's to the left of the number 2 is going to be considered a solution. Similar example here, all I've done is changed it to the equal to sign. So I want you to graph the solution x is less than or equal to 2. So you always are going to draw your number line. For your own reference, I would put 0 on there. Make sure you're showing the number in the solution set, which is the 2. And then on this one, when you go to do your circle, you have to decide if you fill it in or leave it open. So remember, because this has a line underneath it, you use a filled in circle. Okay, so we will color that circle in. That's called a closed circle. And then again, we need to shade all the numbers to the left. So we will shade from that circle to the left. Okay, the only difference here is that in this solution set, any number smaller than 2 is considered a solution, but also the number 2 is considered a solution. Previously, the number 2 was not part of the solution set. So when you go to solve inequalities, there's a couple steps you need to do. The first thing, it's going to feel a lot like solving an equation. To find the solution, you'll either add to both sides or subtract from both sides. You can multiply or divide both sides, just like solving an equation. There is one difference in inequalities, though. Whenever you have to multiply or divide by a negative number, you will have to reverse the direction of the inequality sign. Okay? Let me show you an example of what I mean on the next slide. So let's say I asked you to solve the inequality negative 6x is less than 18. Your goal is the same. Your goal is to get the x isolated. Right now, the x is being multiplied by a negative 6. The opposite of multiplication is division, so we will divide both sides by a negative 6. Since we are dividing by a negative, when we go to write our solution, the inequality sign is going to switch and it will no longer be a less than, it is going to be a greater than. So your solution is that x is greater than negative 3. If you do not reverse the inequality sign, you will have the exact opposite of the answer you want. Now, part of solving is graphing your solution set. So every time you finish solving, I want you to draw a number line. I want you to put the solution on the number line. You have to decide if it's an open or a... Sorry about that. You have to decide if it's going to be an open or a closed circle. That comes from the inequality. Since the line does not have an inequality symbol underneath it or a line underneath it, you go with the open circle. If it has the equal to underneath it, solid circle. Then you have to decide which side to shade. In this problem, we want x to be larger than the negative 3. So that means we're going to shade numbers to the right of negative 3 and put an arrow on the end. Okay, let's try one more. This has a two-step solving process. So same thing, you're trying to get your x isolated, and this says 3x minus 5 is greater than 7. So just pretend that greater than sign looked like an equal sign. If you did, you would start the problem by adding 5 to both sides of the equation, which would give you 3x is greater than 12. And then to isolate your x, you would divide both sides by 3. Now, in this problem, I do not flip my inequality because I did not divide by a negative. I divided by positive 3, so the inequality is going to stay greater than. So the solution is that x is greater than 4. Draw your number line. Put your number 4 on your number line. Again, it is an open circle because there is not a equal to sign, and you will shade to the right of the 4. So any number larger than 4 is going to be a solution. Those don't have to be whole numbers, so 4.1 is a solution. 4.01 is a solution. Any number bigger than 4. Last thing that you're going to see in this section is what's called a compound inequality. You're going to know you're dealing with a compound inequality because it's going to look like you have a variable wedged between two inequality symbols. Notice you have two symbols. Whenever you see that, that is a compound inequality. You can solve it in its form, the form it's written in if you want to, or you can also separate it into two inequalities if you prefer. I like to just solve it all at once. So first, let's practice graphing. So I want you to graph the inequality negative 3 smaller than x less than or equal to 2. So what this really means is that x is going to be stuck between negative 3 and positive 2. So if you were going to graph that on your number line, you would stick 0 in the middle. Negative 3 would be on the left side of 0. Positive 2 would be on the right side of 0. Then you have to decide what type of circles you're going to use. Next to the negative 3, your symbol does not have a line underneath it, so that'll give you an open circle. Next to the positive 2, your symbol does have a line underneath it, so that would give you a filled in circle or a closed circle. And then your goal is that you want the numbers that are between these. So that means your shading is going to go between the two circles. So any number that is larger than -3 and 2 or less is considered a solution. Let's look at an example really quick of a story problem, and then you guys can start your homework. A student must have an average, which is the mean, on 5 tests that is greater than or equal to 80%, but less than 90% to receive a final grade of B. Devin's grade on the first 4 tests were 98%, 76%, 86%, and 92%. What range of scores on the 5th test will give him a B? Okay, so this is actually a compound inequality. And so you'll set it up with your 2 inequality signs. Okay, now if we read this again, we want the test to be greater than or equal to 80. So the 80 has to have an equal to sign on it. But we want to be less than 90. Okay? And then your average of your grades are going to go in your middle. So keep in mind when you average test grades, you add them all together. You don't know what you're going to get on your 5th test, so we'll have to use an X for that one. And after you add all your tests together, you divide by however many tests you took. Now, if it was me, first thing I would do is I would add the 98, 76, 86, and 92 together just to simplify things later on. So if I added those 4 numbers together, I am going to get 352. And a lot of people get nervous when they see the big fraction and they want it to go away. Don't let it scare you. All the fraction means is that you're going to divide by 5. So what's the opposite of dividing by 5? Multiplying by 5. So you need to multiply all 3 parts of the inequality by 5. If you don't do all 3 parts, then you're going to be off. So remember, in the middle, multiplying by 5 and dividing by 5 just knock each other out. And then on the right-hand side, 90 times 5 is 450. And on the left-hand side, 5 times 80 is 400. Now we want to get our x alone in the middle, and right now 352 is being added to it, so we will get rid of the 352 by subtracting it. But we have to do that to both the right and the left to keep our inequality solved properly. So what this means is for Devin to get a B in the class, he has to score a 48 or higher and less than a 98. So if he scores below a 48, his grade's going to slip to a C. If he scores a 98 or higher, his grade's going to go up to an A.